All right, Haley from Price of Avocado Toast. I am so excited to be having this conversation with you. I have been following you for a while, and like I mentioned, your story was super intriguing to me, and I just really wanted to know your journey, your mental state, and the emotions you felt as you were just going through your journey. So I just wanted to start off by asking, what is your earliest memory of money?
My earliest memory of money, I think, is like in fourth or fifth grade. I remember they had some like event at the school where like people, I don't know if they like donated clothes or what it was, but students who didn't have a lot of money were like qualified to go shopping in the cafeteria or wherever they had all the clothes. And I remember being able to go do that and then tying it together with like the lack of money, if that makes sense. Like that's when I really remember like, oh, money is a thing that is necessary. I mean, I have memories before that were like buying candy bar with grandma or whatever. But that's the first significant money memory that I have where I'm like, this is ingrained in me as being different because of money.
Yeah. So as a child, you realized that you were different by going to this I guess event? Like you were able to understand what was happening?
Yeah, as a child, I didn't really ever feel different up until that point. That was the moment where I was like, oh, I feel like there's a difference between some of my friends and myself in regards to finances. And that was the thing that was kind of separating us. I grew up, a little context, I grew up in a single mom household until I was like 11 or 12. And then my mom married my stepdad, who then adopted me. So most of my childhood, it's a single mom household. My mom did the best she could given the resources and the knowledge that she had, but it was really hard. And I didn't really feel how hard it was up until that point. But then I did start to notice the differences. And I think that I'm a former elementary school teacher. So, and I taught fourth grade. So this is kind of relevant. I think that that's when people really start to notice the differences in name brands and how your friends can afford this, this, and this, and you can't. Or maybe it's the other way around, where you're able to go on your family's boat for the weekend and your friends don't have the same resources. So that was when I started to identify the differences financially.
Yeah. So what other, like, could you get into specifics? Like you said that was like a really impactful or memorable moment. So you don't really remember anything before then, or have memories of being different. If not, that's fine. But in terms of that moment, did it start becoming like a theme that you always paid attention to? What were some like examples? You talked about the different activities you and your family would do versus some of your friends, clothing, of course, but any specific memories or just realizations you had?
One other moment that I really remember was in high school when I was able to qualify for like free and reduced lunch when my parents had been laid off during the recession. And my mom is a very humble woman who takes pride in not getting help. And it's interesting looking back. I'm like, why didn't you use all the resources that were available to you? You were low income, you were a single mom struggling, but she didn't want to ask for help. She didn't want to be known as the single mom on welfare using food stamps. She wanted to be, no matter how uncomfortable it was, she wanted to be the one that just pushed through, regardless of how hard it was. It was like, I don't want to have to ask for the help for these resources that I qualify for, rightfully so, given the situation. But I think I totally qualified for a lot more than we actually use. So there was this situation at the school where I got the clothing that we got to shop for when I was in fourth grade. And then when I was in high school, I was like, you guys lost your job. Like, we shouldn't have to be paying for lunch. This is something that is a resource for a reason. Let's apply for this. And I had to like really kind of convince my parents into like doing that because they really didn't want to ask for help. And I started my podcast in 2020, Price of Avocado Toast, and we started talking about our financial journey and stuff like that. And I brought up being from a single mom, low income household on the podcast, and it really offended my mom because that's not how she wants to be remembered. She wants to be remembered as the one who did everything she could, who worked really hard. And I do remember that as well, but we can't discredit my experience, which was that it was hard. It financially was difficult at times. So there are not many, I moved a lot as a child, and I mean like 50 times, quite a lot. Okay. So there are not many pivotal moments where I'm like, oh yeah, I really remember that clearly. But there are like, you know, shopping in 4th grade, and then in high school when my parents lost their job, getting on the free and reduced lunch. I remember in middle school and high school, I did move to an affluent area where I became the lower, like noticeably lower household compared to my friends. My friends lived in like almost 4,000 square foot homes and had boats, houses on the lake, stuff like that. And we lived in a manufactured home that was like a 1970s trailer on some property. And my parents bought it, but it did feel, regardless of them being homeowners or not, to me, it was noticeably different than my friends' mansions as I'm living in a trailer from the 1970s. So it just was really, really noticeable once we moved to that area.
Yeah, did it take a toll on your confidence or your personality at all? Did you feel like you had to overcompensate in other areas? I've heard some kids just try to sew on different labels into their, you know, clothing. It kind of sounded like you shared the example with asking to get onto the free and reduced lunch benefit. Like, were you ashamed of it at all, or did you know, well, this is just what it is and these are the things that can help us?
When we got onto the free and reduced lunch when I was in high school, I noticed that a lot of my friends had access to this because of the recession. This was like 2008, 2009. And it wasn't just me that was experiencing parents that were laid off and unemployed for quite a long time. It was a lot of people. And so I wasn't really ashamed because it was all around me. That wasn't really something that I experienced. But in regards to trying like overcompensate, I feel like I, as much as possible, avoided having friends come over to my house. I wanted to always go to their house because there was a sense of embarrassment in my house. And I know that if I said that to my mom, she would feel really devastated and offended that that's the way that I felt, but it's my truth. And unfortunately, society that we lived in at that time, this is like, you know, everyone's in the really nice houses, living it up right before things crashed. All my friends that had all these seemingly perfect lives actually had everything fall apart as well during the recession. So it was really interesting after the fact. Now that I look back, I'm like, oh, you lived in a 4,000 square foot house you couldn't afford. You leased all these cars. You lost everything just like we lost everything. My parents ended up losing a house and getting a divorce and losing their jobs, just like everyone else's parents did. But at the time, all I saw was they were putting on a front way more than my parents were. They definitely were never materialistic people that like acted like they had it together. And I think that all I saw was the people around me that did look like they had it together. So I definitely did compare myself to my friends that were going to Palm Springs for spring break and Hawaii and Disneyland. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm gonna go camping. And there's nothing wrong with camping, but you notice the difference when you're young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it didn't make you feel like you just compensate in other ways. Like you said, you, instead of inviting people over, you would kind of mask it by going to their homes or just offering to do that instead. But did it have an effect on your social life at all?
it didn't really have an effect on my social life. I feel like it was more an internalized big deal than it really, like, my friends genuinely didn't care where I lived or what I wore, but I thought they did.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But some of my best friends lived in these gigantic houses that were like McMansions, driving BMWs that they got for their 15th birthdays. And I thought that they would think that I'm less than for not having the same things. But that was never really a thing. That was totally me and not them. And I think it's funny when you look back with like just the emotions that occur when you're in your early teens and early 20s. We think everyone cares so much more than they actually do. My friends didn't care. They enjoyed coming to my house, but I thought that they cared.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely those who care, but the ones who matter, your true friends, they don't
Yeah.
care. They don't care. I love that. So did you feel you needed to start working early? What was your first job?
First job was when I think I was 14. It was the summer between freshman and sophomore year of high school, and I started teaching swim lessons. And ironically continued to teach swim lessons for like 15 years.
Oh, wow.
But I taught swim lessons, I became a lifeguard, and I worked really, really hard and totally overcompensated for not having things by feeling like I need to work my butt off to make money so I can then afford these things. And that was the beginning of my poor financial habits because I would get a paycheck. And my first job, this is like 2007 or so, and I started making $12.50 an hour in California, which was a lot of money at that time. Now, granted, I'm teaching swim lessons. These are for like 1 hour, 2 hour little blocks here and there. It wasn't like a 40-hour job by any means. However, I'd get a paycheck that was like $500 and just head and I would just head immediately to the mall to spend everything on name brand things so I could have the things that then resembled all the things that my friends had around me. So I that was me though. That was totally me. My friends didn't say that I had to have Abercrombie and Hollister and all these name brand things in order to be their friends, but I felt like I had to. I wanted to be on their same level, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So finally you get your hands on some money and you're just like kind of going wild.
Yes, balling out.
Balling out. Exactly. Did you feel you had to help out at home financially, like with the bills
No,
or anything?
I never had to help out at home financially. My parents they always kept finances kind of separated from me. They tried to hide it and make it like not a big deal, but I saw them arguing over credit cards and the way they were spending their money. I felt that it was hard, but they never expressed to me like that it was really hard, other than like, we're not going to do that because we don't have money. But it wasn't like, I think sometimes we hear people say, like, we can't do that because we have no money. I don't have that ingrained in my head. Like, oh, we're broke. We can't do that. We have no money. I don't have that. They didn't talk like that. But it was definitely like, if we didn't have money to afford something, for example, cheerleading in high school, I was a cheerleader and I didn't have the multiple thousands of dollars to spend being a cheerleader. So I asked some family if they could sponsor me, and my great aunt ended up paying for my cheerleading. So I was still able to do things, but if my parents didn't have the money to do it, they would just kind of be like, that's not something we can do. We'll see if we can make it work, but that's not something we have the means to do right now.
Yeah. So we'll see if we can make it work. Was that something that often worked out? Did it often work out, or were you often not left without, but just didn't get things that you were looking to have?
Most of the time things did work out financially, and looking back, my parents borrowed a lot of money from my great grandma. My great grandma helped fund a lot of things. For example, when I was in 8th grade, I got to go to the New York DC trip, which was like $2,000 at that time. And my grandma paid for the whole thing. My great aunt paid for my cheer camp and all my uniforms and stuff when I was in high school. And that was a lot of money. So things were still able to be possible, but it wasn't necessarily my parents that were the ones paying for it.
Hmm. Well, that's wonderful that you had the extended family to really support and to help you out. Were you an only child?
Yes, I
Mm.
was an only child growing up as an only child. I've got brothers that never lived with me, but that made it a little easier because it was just me. And then I think my parents actually felt a lot of the pressure from society living in the affluent place that I lived in with all my friends living in their McMansion houses, that doing competition cheerleading, they wanted to make it work so I could fit in.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any examples of ways that they tried to make things work for you? Like what was so do you know how they managed their money? Or like thinking back to ways they could have done better. I know you said you heard them arguing over some things, but are there memories of ways they may have managed their money? Did they ever talk to you or have conversations about financial topics?
My parents never talked to me directly about their financial habits, but I would like overhear conversations and stuff like that. But they actually ended up getting a divorce in 2012. So the recession hit them really hard. They lost their jobs in like 2008, and it took several years before things kind of like crash and burn. But they foreclosed on a house. They were unemployed for, they ran out of unemployment benefits, both of them. That's how long they were unemployed, which was quite a long time. And it just was really, really hard. So that's when I really felt the tension with their finances. There were things that were being put on credit cards. And I think in regards to my parents trying to make it work financially, most of the time, if we had family that could help out, like my great grandma, she would help out and pay for something. But if that wasn't an option, something would just go on a credit card, and it was not a big deal. It was just, we'll put it on a credit card and deal with it later. It wasn't talked about that credit cards are bad. It wasn't talked about that that was a bad thing to put something on a credit card. Like, oh, it was just like, well, let's just, they made it work in my eyes.
Yeah. Okay.
But then I found out when they filed for divorce that my dad had like 20 credit cards that my mom didn't totally know about. So there was a lot of credit card spending happening that made things feel like they were way better than they actually were.
Mm, yeah. So when you came to this, so did you get a credit card lesson at that point at when they became
No.
divorced? Okay, you just knew that that was a big deal within
Yeah, there
the
were no
discussion of
credit
divorce.
card lessons being made at all.
Right.
In
Okay.
fact, I think when I saw how much my parents were using credit cards, I think it validated the fact that credit cards were okay.
Interesting.
Using them wasn't a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
they kept things like, things were really, really hard when I was growing up with a single mom up until my mom married my stepdad. And then when they got married, it was two incomes, and things were definitely a lot easier than they were when it was just a single mom income. However, it still was tight. My parents never worked places where they made a lot of money. And then we moved to the middle of nowhere, which was the affluent place I talk about, but there weren't many jobs. So I think that's why my parents struggled with unemployment for so long during the recession, because there were not very many opportunities when we moved here. It was like, well, if you lose your job, you're just out of luck because there's not much else to do. And credit cards made up for that.
Yeah. So going into young adulthood, kind of like at what point did you move out the house? Did you move out the house? Did you go to school? Did you just start working after high school? What was your experience?
When I was 17, I moved away to college and never came back because I wanted to be somewhere not in the middle of nowhere. I didn't really like where I lived. It was just very isolating. and I wanted to go away to college, and I knew that that was going to be my ticket. So I went away to a 4-year university, and home life was, there was a lot of turmoil at that point during my freshman and sophomore years because my parents were getting a divorce. So I didn't have much desire to come home anyway. So I stayed home. I mean, I stayed in my college town, and then I ended up living there for like 10 years. I just stayed there after college. But yeah, I left at 17 and didn't look back.
Yeah. That was really on your own doing. You weren't kind of like pushed out or anything like that.
No, I definitely was not pushed out. And it's funny because I work now as a financial coach, and one of the questions I ask my clients is like, what was the conversation about college with you? I graduated high school in 2010, and I think many millennials, they graduated high school from like 2005 to 2013 or so. We all kind of have the same answer, and it's like that there wasn't really much of a conversation. We were just going, and we kind of just always knew that. And I don't think that came from my parents directly. Neither of them have a 4-year college education. However, I think it was a major societal push coming from school, and all of the people around me. I genuinely, looking back, don't think I put much thought into going to college and what I was going to do. I was just always going to go. And there wasn't ever a conversation about anything else other than how do I apply and make it happen. So yeah, I was not pushed out. I moved out to go to college, and that was always the plan.
Did you feel like going to college was going to help you be in a better situation financially than you had growing up?
100% going to college was supposed to help us all get jobs and make money. That's what we were told. We were fed that narrative from, I say we, I feel like my whole generation was
Absolutely.
fed that narrative from the
Absolutely.
beginning. You go to college, you get a job, you make money, you'll do better off. You need to go to college to get a job, to make money, to be better off. So, absolutely.
Did you have to work during college? So you left at 17. How far did you go from home? Yeah, let's just stop there.
I left at 17 and I moved about like 3.5 hours away. And due to my parents' financial situation during this time, again, they're in the middle of losing their house. My parents are unemployed. It's not a good time. I qualified for a lot of grants for college. So my undergraduate ended up costing like $90,000 total. And I think I left undergrad with like $30,000 of loans. So I had a lot of grants and scholarships for my first few years. And I, like many millennials, took out way too much of the financial aid offer. I took out more money than I needed, which is why I ended up with loans. My tuition itself was not $90,000. That was just me taking out more than I needed. So there was not much financial education. My parents weren't they were not college educated. They've never done this before. They didn't know how to tell me what to do. The financial aid office most definitely was not telling us how to take out money. They just were telling us that if you want to do it, you can pay for it. It'll be fine. Take out some loans. You'll be good. And I didn't have to work in college, but I did work because, again, I'm chasing the nice stuff. I mean, when I was in college working, it wasn't for my living expenses. My financial aid package covered more than just tuition and all of my living expenses and food. This is so I could go buy a Michael Kors purse and look like I have it together. So it wasn't the like I had to work to pay my rent. It was I already have my financial aid to pay my rent. I want more money. That's where it came from.
Mm-hmm. So did you get it caught up in any type of credit card? Not scam, but you know how they were posted out at the college campuses, they had their tables, sign up for a credit card and get something. Did you fall into any of those traps?
When I was a sophomore, my great uncle passed away and left some money for my parents and myself. And I received $25,000 inheritance from my uncle. And I'm like 19. And I studied abroad my junior year of college. I moved to Sweden and had the most amazing year. I was there for a year and I went to like 18 different countries. I traveled everywhere. It was beautiful. But in that year, which my financial aid package covered my tuition and my rent, in the year I spent the $25,000 just traveling and doing whatever else I was doing in Europe. And I was so broke that I didn't have enough money to buy my plane ticket home. And that was my first moment of, oh no, how did that happen? That went very quickly. Like I knew my $500 little paychecks disappeared quickly. I saw that happen when I went to the mall. This was a different ball game. That was $25,000 that was gone in like 11 months while I was abroad. And I had no regrets, but I definitely had an aha moment of like, that went very quickly. I knew exactly where it went. I traveled, had an amazing time, but it slipped through my fingers to say the least. And when I came back from Sweden I spent 5 years in college. So during my fourth year in college, when I came back from living in Sweden, I opened up my first credit card after I lived in Sweden. And I've done some reflecting with my friends that I lived in Sweden with, and we kind of all did the same thing. We either got credit cards while we were in Sweden because we ran out of money traveling the world and we needed to pay for our flights home, or we got them when we got back. And that's when the credit card cycle started for me.
And what did that cycle look like? So you've told us you like shopping, you like the nice things. Is that what the type of stuff, or just your lifestyle? Were you just spending and swiping it all away?
My first credit card was a Macy's credit card, so it was like a $500 limit at Macy's, just to buy some nice sunglasses or whatever.
Mhm.
But my first actual credit card that you could use in other places, not just a store credit card, was an American Express credit card. It was like a Delta Airline American Express credit card. I have no idea why they approved me for that. I bought it for travel points, and this is so funny looking back because we use credit cards for travel hacking now, and it had one of those sign-on bonuses where it was like 20,000 miles if you do this, this, and this. But I just interpreted it, I'm 21 or whatever, as if I get this credit card, I can then use it and travel 21,000 miles. Actual miles. Like, oh, I can fly to Germany and back and we'll be good to go. Like 21,000 miles is a lot. I had no idea what a mile on a credit card actually was, or how much the dollars converted over to miles and points. But that's where it started. And it got maxed out very quickly. I had no idea what I was doing. And I ended up having a couple little credit cards through Wells Fargo, which was my bank at the time, and a couple store credit cards, and then this big giant American Express one. And over, I think like a 2-year period, I ended up maxing everything out. And then I'm like in $10,000 of credit card debt without knowing what I was doing. And I think that that's often how it starts for people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It was just too easy to get a credit card back then.
It was way too easy to get a credit card, and they gave me way too much of a limit. I didn't have the money to pay for the minimum payments that they were asking. I mean, why give someone so young a $5,000 credit limit when they've never had a credit card? And American Express doesn't usually give people that much credit when they don't have like a reliable credit score. So I felt very cool.
Yeah, yeah. American Express is like, it's a top tier kind of card. So
Yeah.
maybe either way, you got it and you found yourself in, like you said, $10,000 worth of debt. So coming out of college, you get your first adult job. I don't know. What was that like?
So I worked throughout college as a lifeguard, and then I turned into an aquatics manager, and then I turned into a manager of a gym and a complete workaholic because I love making money. And I realized that I could just work harder, work more hours, and make more money and buy more things. And it wasn't necessarily a healthy cycle in regards to my work ethic. I'm a great worker, but it was very much work equals money. I can work my butt off and make as much money as I want to then buy all these things that I want. And it was a cycle that started with my friends in middle school wearing their Hollister sweatshirts and me wanting that continued until like my late 20s, where I'm like, I need this. Someone else has it. This is nice. Very much not a healthy habit. But I worked all the way through college. I worked really hard. I had multiple jobs all the time. Again, just chasing the dollar, really. And by the time I graduated college, I was the manager of a gym, making like $18 an hour, which wasn't that much money, but it was enough to like get by. And I also had $10,000 of credit card debt. So I had to take on another job as a server to pay my bills because my paycheck of $2,000 every couple of weeks was not cutting it. And that's where things really started to spiral with my spending. Like, what's wrong? I should be able to pay my rent. I had 3 roommates at the time. Like, I should be able to do this financially. I'm working hard enough. But I had to take on another job. I was working 40 hours a week, and then I had to take on a whole nother serving job to make things work because I was spending at such an excessive level. And it rose a red flag for me of like, oh, maybe I should get this under control. But I didn't even know where to begin or what that meant. What does being in control of your money even look like? I didn't know.
Yeah. So you started kind of noticing, what was the turning point? Like what got you to really sit down and really think about, okay, what am I doing and how can I fix it? Did you have like an aha moment? Did you just happen to hear someone on the radio or anywhere? Like what was that experience?
When I was a manager of the gym, I had another person move into my office, and she was the new manager, and she mentioned taking out like a 401k loan or something to pay off some of her debt. And I knew I had $10,000 of credit card debt, student loans, but I didn't really think about like how I could strategically start paying those off. And I don't know, I went down a rabbit hole one day on social media and found Clear One Advantage, which is a debt consolidation company. And I called someone the next day. I'm someone, if I get an idea in my head, I'm going for it. So I within like a week was on the phone signing papers, getting everything ready for my debt consolidation through this program. And it trashed my credit. They things were tight for me financially, but I was still paying all my bills. I wasn't late on anything. And when I went through this debt consolidation company, they told me I had the minimum that they'd accept was $10,000 of credit card debt. And most of the time people have way more. Like this would be a good program if you have $70,000 of credit card debt, because then maybe we can negotiate it down to 30. But I had like the bare minimum. And now looking back, I'm like, that was only $10,000. I could have totally figured out a way to be strategic, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I signed up for this program that had me default on everything. Just stop paying everything, and we will essentially go at bat to negotiate for you to lower these bills. Mm-hmm. And in the end, I ended up paying more than I owed to everybody. So it was not a good idea. It ruined my credit. We are approaching 7 years later, and it's just now falling off my credit score.
My goodness.
Because of all of that.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't worth it.
No, and maybe it would have been worth it if I had like $80,000, and they were actually able to help me out. But I ended up paying more, and it ruined my credit. So it was not worth it by any means.
Okay. So when did you get some financial literacy? Like when did you figure out, you said you fell down a rabbit hole and that's how you found Clearwater, the debt consolidation company? Okay.
Yeah,
So
I fell down a rabbit hole and I found Clear One Advantage, the debt consolidation company. And paying off all of those credit cards should be the end, you know. I did it. But that's just the beginning.
my
I met
goodness.
my husband. Yeah, I met my husband around that same time. And when we met, I was going through the debt consolidation. And he had, right after we met, received $600,000 from a wrongful death lawsuit payout after his grandmother died of mesothelioma. And her husband filed lawsuits based off of negligence and wrongful death. And the family won millions of dollars. And my husband's father passed away when he was younger. So whatever would have gone from the grandmother to her son was divided between his heirs. So my husband, my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law each got $1 million. But after legal fees, lawyers, and everything, it was $600,000 for each person. And my husband was 24 at the time, and I was 23. I'm going through this $10,000 debt consolidation. And that was the beginning of like when things really started to spiral. So we met and combined our finances very early, very early. Like from almost day one, we moved in together after knowing each other for 3 months, and we just were like glued to each other, like like a married couple, but in our early 20s, and we just met. Like, I don't recommend this at all. It could have gone extremely sideways, but yeah, the poor spending habits continued because, you know, the debt consolidation was a band-aid, and I blew through $25,000 my uncle gave me a couple years before that, and then got into $10,000 of debt. My husband helped me pay that off quickly. So again, band-aid situation, band-aid situation. And my husband's situation growing up was very similar to mine. Single mom, low income, but they had 3 kids. I was just a single child. So his situation was definitely way tighter than mine actually was. And his mom never remarried. So his whole entire life was a single income household. And he got lottery winning type money as a 24-year-old with zero financial education. And we blew it. We spent all of it and then got into over $220,000 of combined debt in 3.5 years, which sounds pretty absurd. But when you look at the past and how we spent money leading up into that, like up until that point, it makes sense. I couldn't manage $25,000. How was I going to manage 600,000?
You have that experience of, like let's say a homeless person won the lottery or whatever, whoever low income won the lottery and it's gone tomorrow, or even athletes, entertainers, people who get into large sums of money and a couple years later you're like, where did it all go? So you have that firsthand experience. My gosh.
I have firsthand experience with having money, large amounts of money fall into my lap multiple times and having it just disappear. And there's a stat that 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt within 7 years, like actually filing bankruptcy. And I have no doubt in my mind we were headed to right at that. We were headed there. If we didn't get our finances together, we were going to be right there because the spending just continued. It just continued and continued and continued. And it was like consumerism and capitalism and like spend money on this, this, and this. And what when I was younger was like Hollister and Abercrombie name brand stuff turned into travel as an adult, or like a new car, or we bought a house and that we needed to furnish and get all these nice things. So we were the Joneses that were keeping up with other Joneses that it wasn't necessarily just like name brand pretty stuff, but it was like, let's make it look like we've got it together because we're good. Everything's
Yeah.
good. And I don't think that was ever like an actual conscious thought of ours. Like we have to look like we have it together so everything's perfect and people honor us. That was never really what we were thinking. But when you look back, it's like that's exactly what we were doing. I loved having people come to my house and compliment me on how nice my house was and how everything just looked all put together. And that stems from childhood when people were like, "Oh, where did you get that? That looks really nice." And so it just continued and exacerbated on this ridiculous level where the money literally fell through our hands. And people ask us all the time, "What did you do? What did you spend money on?" Well, we put $270,000 down payment on a $530,000 house, which was a huge down payment, massive. I'm so thankful we didn't just do a little down payment, but the rest of it, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars that are unaccounted for.
My
I
goodness.
can't even tell you what we spent it on because we were just spending money like on everything.
Yeah.
It was wine tasting on a Wednesday to go buy $300 worth of wine. It was buying the computer that I'm using right now for Zoom that's like a 40-inch like it's like this thing. iMac. It was all of these things that were just like supplementing our life because we felt rich for the first time ever. For the first time ever, these kids that grew up relatively poor with not a lot of money had a lot of money and felt rich. So we acted like it too.
Yeah. So interesting because I became interested in financial literacy at a young age. So I we have similar younger stories, but for me, since I learned such it was very I don't even remember the class, but I know I learned finance or the concept of budgeting in an econ class. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so important to know. And I'm going to do well with my money. So I've always kind of hoarded money. I was kind of different from you. So I'm listening to your story and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how different it would have been for me. But where, at what point, please tell me, when did you figure out, okay, we have a problem that we need to do something about? So you get the 600,000, it slips through your fingers, you pick up some debt, 200,000 plus worth of debt, right? Then what?
Yeah, we finished grad school. My husband and I each finished school. We were both teachers making salaries for the first time. We should be good. Should be good. And it was 2019 and I'm pregnant with our first child and I came home from Costco with some muffins and my husband and I got in a big fight over muffins and we don't really argue ever about anything. I've got this big fight over muffins and I'm like, what's wrong? Like, what's really the issue here? Because it can't be the muffin. And we realized the month before was the first month we were bringing, both of us bringing home teacher incomes as like salaries getting paid beginning of the month. And you have to let that stretch for the whole month. And we went on a trip for our anniversary. And that's the 8th of the month. So after we got home from our anniversary trip, we had no money, like $0. And so everything was getting put on our credit cards, like our electric bill, our water bill, like groceries. And then a couple weeks later, I came home with these muffins from Costco, and we were like, "What are we doing? We're fighting over $7 muffins. This is pretty ridiculous. We should be okay. We have the income coming in. We should be okay." And that was the big red flag for us because we don't want to live a life where we're arguing over $7. That feels ridiculous. But also, why weren't we okay? And that was the red flag. Why are we struggling so much financially? Well, we had accrued $27,000 of credit card debt. We had $130,000 of student loans. We had a $50,000 car loan, a $17,000 timeshare that we're paying on. And our life was just inflated. Our income wasn't nearly what our expenses were. And that's where we were like, we have to fix this. this is going to be bad if we don't fix it now.
So what did you do? Like, did you go back onto social media? Did you come across some information? Like how did you turn things around? My goodness.
Yeah, my brother had recommended Dave Ramsey like years and years before and his Total Money Makeover book. And I kind of listened to him a little bit, but didn't really take it into too much consideration. But then when we found ourselves in that situation, we were like, let's listen to this audiobook together and start listening to his podcast. And we went like all in, all in on Dave Ramsey and his plan. We drank the Kool-Aid and then some for a good like year. And then we kind of took what worked for us and left the rest, stepped away from following him exclusively, and then continued to kind of do our own thing. And we ended up paying off $132,000 of our 220 in a year and a half just by slashing. I mean, we went very extreme. Our approach was extremely drastic, and I'm so thankful my husband and I come from similar backgrounds, because when life hit the fan, we know how to buckle down, and we did, because we know how to be broke. We've done it before, and it wasn't nearly as hard as it is for some people, because we were like, let's just go back to this place we've been. We grew up this way. It'll be a hard few years, and then we can reevaluate after we pay off all this debt. But that's what we did. We cut everything drastically. We got second jobs. We threw every extra penny at our debt. We were extremely aggressive with it.
How did you cut things back? Did you sell anything, any vehicles? Did you like, what were your methods in cutting back? You mentioned you increased your income as well, so that helped.
My husband got a second job while he was teaching, so that was quite a bit of money coming in. But we budgeted and sliced things to, like, for example, our dining out when we first started tracking was like $700 a month, and we cut it down to like 20. Like, we cut things extremely drastic. At this time, we were living off of like $5,600 a month was our like budget. We needed that to pay our bills. And that was 2019, 2020. And now in 2023, our current budget is like close to $10,000. So we sliced it like almost in half. We went a little extreme. And we sold things. We sold quite literally everything we could sell. Things that we weren't using. We sold cameras, clothing, little kitchen things. We had no problem paying off debt. We got really good at paying off debt. I have to thank Dave Ramsey for that. As in, he is so debt driven that that's all we cared about. But then I realized we weren't really learning those things that were like how to actually manage your money 101. It was like, we can pay off debt with a vengeance. I can do that very well. Can I stay out of debt and continue to budget and work on those actual sustainable habits? That's what we had to continue to figure out after the fact, after we paid off all this debt.
Yeah. So you learned about budgeting. Thank you. You shared that you found your dining out was a lot. What other surprises did you find with your income? Just want to stay there a little bit because I used to watch this show, Till Death Do Us Part. It's like it was based in Canada, and this woman would come in and look into your finances and find there are replica shows nowadays about it, but like she would look in and see how much you're spending. So 700 in dining out. What else?
It was just random things. It was $700 in dining out. It was furnishing our house, clothing, skincare. I mean, I did all the self-care. I was getting massages, getting my nails done, getting my hair done. All of that went away.
All the things. All the things.
We cut it. So anything that was not necessary was gone immediately.
Yeah. So
just gone.
you mentioned, you know, you initially went all in with the Dave Ramsey program, but then found, you know, you don't have to do it all of it, and kind of started to do things your own way, or did you hear about other methods? Like, how did your world open up? You also mentioned the other financial topics that you weren't learning, and how to properly manage your money, or even get into investing. How did that all start?
When we were following Dave Ramsey, I felt quite a bit of shame, to be honest, with stepping away from his plan at all. Anything that was not on his 7 baby steps, if I did it differently, I felt really bad about it. And our story is not conventional. Not everyone has $600,000 just land in their lap. Like, this isn't normal. So our approach to paying off debt wasn't the most conventional either. Before all of this started, like really paying stuff down, we did a cash out refinance against our equity in our home. We took out money and paid off my car because we had a lot of equity in our house. We were able to do that. So we paid off my $50,000 car. We cashed out my husband's Roth IRA contributions. These are things I don't necessarily recommend, but they worked for us in our situation. So we did liquidate quite a bit of things to get things going. We had 2 paid off vehicles. That's a lot of privilege. A lot of people don't have 2 brand new paid off vehicles, but we had that because we had $600,000. So like, because of the original $600,000, we had some assets we were able to liquidate to then expedite the rest of our debt payoff journey. My husband liquidated his Roth IRA contributions. Like I said, he sold his car. We ended up selling both of the paid off vehicles to pay off debt. And once I realized, like, this is what's working for us, I do not recommend people are just cashing out their retirement. That's not necessarily the approach I recommend people go. But we were like, we're not even 30. We're not even 30. We can fix this. We have time on our side. We can fix this and then we'll be on the other side and we can invest aggressively and we can get way better than where we're at right now. And his Roth IRA contributions were like $12,000. It wasn't some crazy amount of money, but we were able to take that and then sell the cars. And I think once I realized, like, we're working really hard and I don't feel very good about it because of the shame that I was feeling from following Dave Ramsey's plan and not doing it perfectly. That was when we started to explore some other avenues and start looking online. And we started our podcast in June of 2020 to share our story. And we were like in deep with Dave Ramsey at that time when we started. And through starting the podcast and starting an Instagram, I realized there was an entire hashtag debt-free community out there that I didn't even know existed. I didn't know that social media was a thing, because up until that point, I mean, I knew social media was a thing, but I didn't know there was like finance social media people. Up until that point, the only person talking to us was Dave Ramsey. And then we got on Instagram and we're like, oh my gosh, there's a whole entire world. It's like an open sea of educators and people with different perspectives and backgrounds. And I realized, okay, I don't have to just listen to this guy. I can listen to all of these people, and I can actually take what worked for me from Dave Ramsey and pair it with what works from this person and this person. And then to be honest, when we stepped away from him and really opened up our world to like accepting information and education from other sources, it was game over, because I no longer was feeling bad about myself, about the things that we did that got us here. We have a very weird situation, and it's never been normal. It will never be normal. There are mistakes we've made along the way, but they've gotten us here. So I look back now and I'm like, I actually don't regret doing that. I wouldn't necessarily have it be the first recommendation I give my clients, but it worked for us and our situation. And what works for us in our specific situation is going to be so different than what works for someone else.
Yeah. I was going to ask, so once you realized, you know, what you had done with the um, the windfalls that you had received, and then you learn, you know, proper ways to manage your money, did you feel shame? And you kind of answer that. That's how you were feeling on the Dave Ramsey while you were on the program, but also you felt shame because you weren't following it to a T.
There was a lot of shame associated with realizing what we had done. We had major epiphanies. Like, what the heck did we do? We had how much money? How fast did it go? What did we buy? Like, there was a lot of shame there that took a long time to really work through. Honestly, it took years to work through. But I can confidently say 3 years later, after we started our podcast and really started opening things up to other resources, I don't feel that way anymore. But it took a lot of internal work to really work through what we had done with our money. And I felt horrible. Like, how could I do such a thing? But then I started talking to some other people and realized almost everybody would have done maybe a different way of spending the money, but they would have found a way to have it be spent in a short period of time if they came from the same background with the same financial education that both of us came from. I think that was the missing piece for me. It was like, I'm actually not stupid for doing this. I didn't know better. Now I do. Won't do that again. But yeah, there was a lot of shame for a long time.
Yeah, I could imagine. So my question just was, I lost my question, but I'm so sorry we are going over time, but
Oh, it's okay.
okay.
I have nothing right after this, so that's
okay,
fine.
perfect. I know that, you know, the shame that you feel and then realizing a lot of people have gone or would have made the similar decision. Is that the main way you were able to get over it? Did you have to go through any type of therapy? Like, how did you overcome that feeling or that shock or any of what you were feeling when you started learning like better ways to manage your money?
I think the biggest way we overcame all of the shame and the feelings that we were feeling was just by being so public about our story, starting the podcast, going on Instagram, and being fully transparent. Because up until this point, we were the Joneses, keeping up with the Joneses with the perfect little life. And then we decided to go very public, telling everyone everything we've done with money. And everyone was like, what? I thought you guys were fine. Like, I had no idea. And that's when I realized, well, yeah, you have no idea because people don't talk about this. And then we started being the people in our lives and all the people around us lives that were facilitating these conversations about money and money management, financial education, budgeting, debt, all of this. This was never an open conversation until we started the conversation. And then I realized a lot of people are in they're in similar situations with very different ways of getting there. Now, we had a lot of money, we got into a lot of debt. It's a different way that we got there than someone else, but us having $27,000 of credit card debt was just as heavy as my friend who might have $15,000 of credit card debt. And I realized, wow, we're actually kind of all on the same page, working towards this thing quietly, in silence, pretending like everything's fine. And that's when we started to work through things. It was done very publicly. It was done through our podcast episodes, years of talking to people through social media. And eventually, a year after we started our podcast, I started my financial coaching business. I was a teacher, like I mentioned earlier, and I just decided I wanted to help people feel better about their money. And I wasn't really wanting to go back to like the actual classroom at that point because I had a couple young kids, and my business was just kind of born. It's just kind of crazy looking back. I'm like, oh, now I help people manage their money. And I'm the one who had terrible money management for so long. But now I get to actually help people have that education and transparency with their own finances so that they can make better financial choices. And hopefully I can be the person in someone's life, like whoever your econ teacher was, that taught you about budgeting and basic financial foundations, right? I want to be that person in all these people's lives because I didn't have that. There was
Yeah.
there was no one telling me how to manage my money or how to make a budget or why debt is could be bad or could be really strategic. No one was having that conversation with me. So I feel like we really worked through our own shame by opening up the door to the conversation with other people.
Yeah. Like I said, it couldn't have been me. I could not have gotten a windfall or two windfalls because my story would have been the opposite, the hoarding or the scarcity kind of at the way you carry yourself when you have that kind of mindset. So I think it's definitely had to be you and your husband to experience that because you've turned around and are using your story and have been so public with your story. How did you even get the confidence to go online and tell your business pretty much?
We just did. I frequently do get questions about like how are you comfortable talking about this? And I feel like it was such a mass story. It's not funny at all, but I feel like if we just took it with a little bit of laughter and we're like, don't make so many mistakes like we did, it would just feel easier. And I don't know how we became so brave and confident to do that. I mean, to be honest, the first time we recorded a podcast, I was like half drunk because I was so nervous just because I didn't want anyone to know what was being said. I didn't want to tell everyone this, but then it was out within our first two episodes. Everything was out there. And I was like, okay, that was done. We ripped the band aid off. And then people would start to ask clarifying questions. And yeah, that's just where it started. It's kind of funny looking back because I think we were able to make light of our ridiculousness with our spending, to be honest. And the way that we did that made people a little more comfortable because they're like, well, at least it's not as bad as them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I said, it definitely, our stories and our journeys are our journeys. And I feel like, you know, you often think to yourself, like, why can't I get a windfall? Or some people might just be coveting like what other people have. And it's like, well, if I got a windfall, one, I would have done differently. And two, I'm a very private person. So I would not have had the confidence to just tell the world. And so when you tell the world, you're helping other people. And I know you're reaching a lot of people and helping them through their journeys, windfall or not. It's just hearing hearing your story, which compared to someone who maybe only received $10,000, like helps helps that person feel a lot better about themselves and do the work to get them in a better position. So definitely had to be you and your husband going through this. Um,
Yeah.
what?
And you will receive a windfall. It just might not be $600,000. It might be a $500 unexpected tax return or a bonus from work or a small inheritance from a grandparent. You will receive some sort of unexpected money at some point, and the hope is that people are ready to receive that money. We were not ready to receive, I was not ready to receive $25,000 when I was 19. We were not ready to receive $600,000 when we were 23 and 24. And yeah, I hope people are ready for it when they do get it. It might look different. It might not be $1,000,000. It might be $10,000, but that's still money you have to be ready and prepared to manage, or you're not going to do the wisest things with it. It almost doesn't matter that ours was $600,000, which sounds kind of wild to say that. But I think we would have done, I know we would have done the same thing if it was $6,000,000 or $60,000 because we
Yeah,
weren't ready.
yeah. It's not really the numbers, it's the behaviors. How
Mm-hmm.
are you managing your money so that you're just using it wisely. Like you're maxing out, uh, you know, the potential of your money, or just like creating a full life while also doing the responsible things. Um, Last question. Where is that question? Um, what advice, I guess, yeah, what advice would you give others now that you've gone and have gotten to where you are currently? But what advice would you give someone, I guess everyone? I love how you put that, like a windfall doesn't have to have so many commas or zeros behind it. It could be $500 you weren't expecting, anything unexpected. So I love how you put that. But what advice would you give all of us, I guess, on our journeys as we're going through our own financial ups and downs or just experiences?
If I'm going to give someone advice on finances in general, it's going to be to get started now. Don't wait until you're 30 because you're going to feel like an adult, or wait until you're 45. Like, get started now. It doesn't have to mean that you pay off $132,000 in a year and a half. That was aggressive. That was a lot. We did that very intensely. However, you can start paying off debt now. You can start investing now. If you wait even just another year, you could be going backwards. Like, if you ask yourself, like, what does my life look like in 2 years if I get this together and really get on my best financial track? What does that look like? You probably can't even imagine what that life looks like because you haven't tapped into it yet. But also ask yourself, what happens if I don't start now and get this together? How could this go backwards? Then you really are setting yourself 4 years backwards. So just get started, because you don't have to do everything all at once. You don't have to pay off all your debt and max out your 401k and live your best life all at the same time. I believe you can do all of that. It just has to be prioritized one thing at a time.
Yeah, yeah. You don't know what you don't know. And so I love what you said with just get started. You don't know because you don't know where finance or having good money management, like how that feels. Like you don't realize, yes, I should get started with this today, because the way I'll feel when I get this together, it's just something you can't really describe. Um, but thank you so much for sharing your story. You were super open about a lot of things. So I really appreciate the detail that you went into. So you are on your way to becoming an AFC, an associated financial counselor, accredited financial counselor. And your podcast is Price of Avocado Toast. Any other social medias or ways of contact you want to share?
We are on basically all social media at Price of Avocado Toast. Our podcast is available wherever you're listening to this podcast. And our Twitter is Price Avocado, just because they don't like all of our letters. But we're available everywhere. And I appreciate you having me on your podcast, Melissa. This is really nice to share my story. It's always wild when I take someone down the memory lane. I'm like, there's been a lot there. But I have to say, before we log off, we went so extreme in our approach and cut everything and got to the other side. And we still have debt. We still have some student loans. We'll pay them off eventually, but we're kind of waiting to see what's going on with those. But we don't have credit card debt anymore. And now we use credit cards responsibly, and we do travel hacking. And I'm living quite literally my best life right now. A life I couldn't have even imagined 4 years ago when we were getting in an argument over $7. So we went and cut everything, and I've brought everything and then some back into my life, and I can actually afford it now and do it responsibly. And it feels like such a beautiful full circle moment to be where I'm at now, because 4 years ago I was like, oh, what did we do? This is like the worst of the worst, the rock bottom. And I think people need to hear that. It doesn't have to just be cutting everything and being miserable forever. We worked really hard for 2 years, really hard. But now I get to relax and enjoy the finer things in life that I've always liked. and not feel bad about it. And I can actually afford it and pay for it. And it's just, it feels so good to be in control. And now I get to help people have that same feeling because I'm like, oh, that was cool. I wish that I could have felt that all along, but I didn't. Like you said, you don't know what you don't know. I didn't know how to manage my money. And then when you learn that, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and what a story. I mean, you had to go through what you had to go through, and I think your experiences make you a better coach. You know, you could be the person who has never had any of this experience. You just got into this financial career, but you never really had any financial issues or went through any ups and downs. Like, to me, that's not enough. You have to have your own experiences coupled with the education to really empathize with people and kind of help them in just the more ways than just the numbers. So thank you so much once again for sharing your story, Haley. I'm going
Thank
to
you
end
for
the
having me.
oh yeah. That's what you should I should have waited for saying that. But I was gonna say gonna end the recording, but we'll still stay on just to wrap up.
Okay,
So
cool.
I'm just gonna go through that one more time and then you can say thank you for having me. Um,
Okay.
Thank you once again, Haley from Price of Avocado Toast, for coming on and sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for having me.